"I speak 10 languages," the young woman stated, shackles clinking against the wood. The judge practically choked on his own laughter. "Sure, and I'm a linguistic prodigy," he sneered for the gallery's amusement, but the moment she parted her lips, his amusement died in his throat. The Superior Court had never been this packed. Standing room only, bodies pressed against the plaster, reporters with lenses covered, just waiting for the signal to snag the day's headline. The low hum of the crowd felt like static electricity, rattling the vents of the decaying courthouse. Valentina Reyes made her way to the defendant's table, wrists bound. The room went dead silent, her footsteps the only sound until Bailiff Raymond Cooper bellowed, "All rise! Court is now in session." The gallery shuffled to their feet as Judge Harrison Mitchell swept in from the side, clutching a chaotic stack of files. He was a heavy-set man with slicked-back silver hair and the kind of face that comes from decades of deciding other people's fates. It was a look etched with boredom, arrogance, and a healthy dose of contempt. "Be seated," Mitchell commanded, dropping the files on his bench with a thud that made the front row jump. Valentina stood flanked by 2 guards with Patricia Mendoza, her court-appointed attorney, hovering at her left. Patricia was a middle-aged woman clearly crushing under the weight of a massive caseload and a shoestring budget. She had deep bags under her eyes and the subtle hand tremor of someone running on 4 hours of sleep and 5 cups of coffee. "Docket number 47B, 2024, the clerk announced. The State versus Valentina Reyes. Charges include wire fraud, identity theft, and aggravated swindling." A wave of whispers washed over the room. Valentina could feel hundreds of eyes burning holes in her back. The verdict already decided in their minds before the first exhibit was shown. It was a familiar weight. She'd carried it her entire life. Prosecutor Thomas Bradford stood up with a flourish, straightening his tie like he was waiting for a curtain call. Lean and sharp-featured, he spoke with the kind of polished, upper-crust cadence that instantly told everyone in the room who was in charge. "Your Honor," Bradford began, his voice projecting to the back row, "we have before us a young woman who has pulled off one of the most sophisticated cons this jurisdiction has ever witnessed. For months, Miss Reyes posed as a certified interpreter, peddling her services to multinational corporations, universities, and even government agencies." He paused for effect, pacing slowly in front of the jury box. "She pocketed thousands of dollars for translations she allegedly performed in 10 different languages. 10, Your Honor. But the truth? This young woman barely scraped through high school. No degree, no certification, not a single piece of paper to back up these linguistic claims." Bradford turned to Valentina with a smile that feigned pity but dripped with condescension. "We understand that financial desperation can drive people to make poor choices, but fraud is fraud, regardless of the backstory." Valentina's hands tightened into fists inside the metal cuffs. Every word from the prosecutor felt like a blow to her self-worth, not because he was right, but because nobody gave a damn about her side of the story. Judge Mitchell flipped through the case files, looking completely checked out, as if this were just another tedious item on his to-do list. He yawned wide, not even bothering to cover his mouth. "Does the defense have anything to add before we move on?" He droned on without looking up from his desk. Patricia Mendoza cleared her throat nervously. Her hands shook slightly as she gripped a battered notepad. "Your Honor, my client maintains her innocence. The charges here are built on misunderstandings and a lack of communication with her employers. Miss Reyes is prepared to prove she possesses the skills she claims, to demonstrate them." Mitchell finally looked up, eyebrows raised in amused mockery. "And how exactly does she plan to prove she speaks 10 languages? Is she going to sing us a lullaby in each one?" A ripple of nervous laughter ran through the gallery. The judge smirked, clearly pleased with his own wit. "Your Honor, with all due respect—" Patricia tried to interject, but Mitchell cut her off with a dismissive wave. "Miss Mendoza, I've read the file. Your client is 23 years old. She grew up in the projects, and according to these records, she was scrubbing office floors before starting this so-called translation business." He locked eyes with Valentina. "There is no record of higher education, no international certification, absolutely nothing to suggest this girl could speak 3 languages, let alone 10. That was when Valentina finally lifted her head. Her eyes, which had been glued to the floor the entire hearing, snapped up to meet the judge's gaze. Her eyes burned with a quiet fury, fueled by a lifetime of being overlooked, undervalued, and treated like she didn't exist. "Permission to address the court, Your Honor," she stated, her voice cutting through the room with unwavering steadiness. Mitchell blinked, caught off guard. Defendants usually sat there like statues during prelims, letting their high-priced suits do the talking. Yet the way this girl stared him down sparked a strange cocktail of annoyance and genuine intrigue in his gut. "Do you actually have anything pertinent to add?" he asked, dripping with skepticism. "I am fluent in 10 languages." Valentina enunciated every syllable with surgical precision, her tone devoid of even a whisper of hesitation. "And I can prove it. Right here, right now, if the court allows." The room went dead silent, leaving only the low, electric hum of the overhead lights. Every person in the gallery leaned in, as if the entire world had collectively stopped breathing to see what happened next. Then, Judge Harrison Mitchell did the last thing anyone anticipated. He tossed his head back and roared. Not a polite chuckle, but a booming, bordering on hysterical guffaw that shook his heavy frame against the bench. "You have got to be kidding me," he wheezed through his laughter. He wiped a tear from his eye with a handkerchief. "The defendant wants to put on a show? Proving she speaks 10 languages right here in my courtroom?" Chuckles rippled through the room. Prosecutor Bradford grinned like a Cheshire cat, shaking his head in mock disbelief. Some spectators laughed out loud, while others leaned over to whisper snide remarks to their neighbors. "Ms. Reyes," Mitchell managed to gasp out, regaining some composure though his voice still quivered with amusement. "I appreciate the creativity truly, but this is a court of law, not an audition for America's Got Talent. We aren't wasting the taxpayers' time with sideshow tricks. Do you think justice is a circus?" "Is that a rhetorical question?" Valentina's voice sliced through the air like a razor, freezing the judge's smirk instantly. His eyes narrowed into slits, a dangerous silence descending on the chamber. "Excuse me?" he rumbled, his tone dropping to a low threat. Valentina stepped up, shaking off the frantic tug on her sleeve from her lawyer, Patricia Mendoza. "With all due respect, Your Honor, you just mocked me without hearing a word I said. You've passed judgment before I could even present a defense. If that isn't a circus, I don't know what is." Bailiff Cooper stepped forward, hand on his belt, ready to move, but the judge waved him off. Mitchell leaned over the bench, resting his heavy elbows on the mahogany. "You've got a spine, Ms. Reyes, I'll give you that. But a spine won't save you from the pile of evidence sitting right here." "The evidence is wrong," Valentina shot back. "Or, rather, the people interpreting it lied because they couldn't be bothered to check if I was actually telling the truth about my skills." "And why would we waste our time?" Bradford interjected lazily from his table. "Why should the state burn taxpayer money chasing the wild fantasies of a criminal trying to dodge a prison sentence?" "Because that is your job." Valentina whipped around to face him, her voice ringing out. "Your duty is to find the truth, not to assume guilt because I don't fit your profile." "Order!" Mitchell brought the gavel down with a sharp crack. "Miss Reyes, you are skating on very thin ice. I suggest you zip it before I slap you with a contempt charge." Valentina took a steadying breath, her heart hammering against her ribs so hard she feared the microphone might pick it up. But she held her ground. She'd spent her whole life stepping back to let others pass. Not today. "Your Honor?" Patricia Mendoza jumped in hastily. Her voice shook slightly, but the resolve was there. "I am formally moving that my client be permitted to demonstrate her linguistic proficiency. If she can verify her claims regarding these languages, it fundamentally alters the premise of the prosecution's case." Mitchell stared at her, looking equal parts baffled and annoyed. "Ms. Mendoza, are you seriously proposing we turn my courtroom into a language lab?" "I am suggesting we give my client a fair shot at a defense," Patricia replied. She stood taller, tapping into a well of courage she hadn't realized was there. "Isn't that the very definition of justice?" The judge leaned back, the leather chair groaning in protest under his bulk. He fixed his gaze on Valentina, studying her like a complex equation that refused to balance. Something about the girl got under his skin. It wasn't just the nerve. It was the absolute, unshakable certainty burning in her stare. "Fine," he finally grunted, shocking the entire room. "I'll give you the rope to hang yourself with. But mark my words, when you fail, and you will fail, I'm tacking on contempt and obstruction charges to your rap sheet." He swiveled toward his clerk. "Get the State University Linguistics Department on the line. Tell them to send over 10 professors. I want a specialist for every single language Ms. Reyes claims to have mastered." A sudden jolt of adrenaline surged through Valentina's veins. At long last, she had her shot. Someone was actually going to listen. "Ms. Reyes." Judge Mitchell studied her, wearing that distinct condescending smirk he'd spent 40 years polishing. "I truly hope you grasp the gravity of this stunt. Once this charade wraps up, I won't just nail you for fraud. I'll make sure the whole world sees you for the charlatan you are." "I'm not a liar," Valentina's voice was low, but it didn't shake. "And when the dust settles, you're the one who's going to owe me an apology." The courtroom erupted in scandalous whispers. Nobody, absolutely nobody, dared speak to Judge Mitchell like that. "Order!" The gavel came down like a hammer blow. Mitchell glared at her, eyes burning with rage and perhaps a reluctant sliver of respect. "Hearing adjourned until the specialists arrive. We reconvene in 3 days, and take note, Ms. Reyes, those 72 hours will likely be the last taste of freedom you ever get." As the bailiffs marched her out of the chamber, Valentina couldn't help but wonder if she'd just signed her own death warrant, or if she'd finally taken the first real step toward clearing her name. She had no idea that the coming days would unearth buried truths that would rewrite not just her future, but the fate of everyone who had stood in that courtroom. The steel gates slammed shut behind her, the clang reverberating like a clap of thunder in Valentina's skull. The New Hope Detention Center was a 3-story block of concrete that reeked of industrial bleach and human misery. The whitewashed walls were peeling at the seams, seeming to swallow what little daylight fought its way through the barred windows. Valentina walked down the corridor, bracketed by 2 stone-faced guards. They'd taken the cuffs off, yet the phantom weight remained on her wrists, invisible now, but heavier than steel. Other inmates tracked her movement from their cages, some with predatory curiosity, others with the 1,000-yard stare born of long-term confinement. "Cell 47C," announced Officer Torres. She was young, her demeanor professional without the usual edge of cruelty. She hauled the metal door open with a screech that echoed down the block. "You've got a bunkmate. Try not to kill each other." Valentina stepped inside, and the door slammed shut with a finality that made her bones rattle. The space was a shoebox. 2 narrow bunks, a sink the size of a dinner plate, and a toilet that offered zero dignity. High up on the wall sat a sliver of a window, placed there just to remind them that a world existed out there, one they couldn't touch. On the bottom bunk, a middle-aged woman looked up from a dog-eared paperback. Carmen Estrada's face was a roadmap of deep lines, each one hinting at a hard-luck story she'd likely never tell. Her graying hair was pulled back in a severe braid, but her eyes, tired as they were, still held a sharp, intelligent glint. "So, you're the famous polyglot," Carmen said. Her mouth curved into a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Whole blocks buzzing about you. The girl who stared down Judge Mitchell and lived to tell the tale." Valentina hoisted herself onto the top bunk, feeling the thin, unforgiving mattress beneath her. She didn't answer right away. She was drained, body and soul. The courtroom rush had faded, leaving nothing but a heavy, hollow ache in her chest. "I'm not famous," she finally murmured. "Just sick of people thinking I'm less than I am." Carmen let out a dry chuckle. "Honey, in here we're all sick of something. Difference is, most of us stopped fighting a long time ago. You've still got that fire. That's dangerous in a cage like this. Dangerous because hope cuts deeper than giving up ever could." Carmen snapped her book shut. "So, is it true? You really speak 10 languages?" Valentina stared at the stained ceiling. 11, actually," she whispered, but nobody bothered to ask. 11. Carmen sat up, genuinely intrigued now. How on earth does a girl your age pick up 11 languages? For the first time in days, Valentina actually felt the urge to explain. Maybe it was because Carmen didn't look at her like she was a fraud. Or maybe, in that suffocating box, they were just 2 people trying to keep it together. "My grandmother," Valentina started, the tension leaving her voice. "Grandma Lucia, she spent her whole life scrubbing floors and folding laundry for diplomatic families. Revolving door of employers. One family leaves, another moves in. Germans, French, Chinese, Russians, Arabs. She picked up scraps of every language just to survive, just to make herself indispensable." Carmen listened in silence as Valentina went on. "My parents died in a bus crash when I was 5. Grandma took me in, dragged me along to all those big, fancy houses. While she was in this kitchen cooking and ironing, I was sitting on the rug with the diplomats' kids. I played with them, ate with them, learned with them." Her voice caught in her throat. "But diplomats rotate out every 2 or 3 years. Every time I finally made a friend, they packed up and vanished. Just when I'd master the local tongue, I'd get shuffled to a new foster home with a completely different dialect. But I never let that stop me, I just kept absorbing everything. It was how I held on to the ghosts of people I left behind. What about your abuela?" Carmen's voice dropped to a whisper. "Gone 2 years now." Her heart finally gave out. 50 years of breaking her back in the fields, it just used her up. Valentina squeezed her eyes shut. So, I was left with nothing. No fancy degree, no piece of paper saying I was smart, just a head full of voices and no way to prove they weren't just noise. That's when you pivoted to translation work, right? Carmen finished the thought. I tried the legitimate route, applied at all the big firms, but they wouldn't look at me without a master's degree or some gold-stamped certificate. They wouldn't even let me take a test to prove I could do the job. You could hear the old anger rising in her throat. So, I went freelance, started my own hustle. I undercut the corporate giants online and delivered flawless work. Then why are you sitting in a cell? Valentina locked eyes with her. Because some bureaucrat decided it was physically impossible for an uneducated nobody to possess my skill set. They flagged my business as a scam without bothering to read a single document I translated. Now I'm rotting in here, fighting to prove I'm not a liar. The rhythm of heavy boots on concrete cut their chat short. The steel door swung open, revealing Officer Torres. Reyes, you've got visitors. Consultation room. Now. Valentina hopped off the bunk, mind racing. She hadn't requested a call. Who was left to call? The meeting room was little more than a closet bisected by a scarred metal table. Patricia Mendoza, her court-appointed lawyer, sat waiting. But she had company. A sharp-looking woman in a tailored suit, expensive leather briefcase resting in front of her. Valentina, this is Dr. Elena Vasquez, Patricia said, gesturing stiffly. She's a forensic psychologist. The DA insisted on a mental health eval before we go back to court. Valentina's stomach dropped. A psych eval? What kind of game was this? Dr. Vasquez's voice was smooth, practiced. It's a standard protocol when a defendant displays atypical behavior patterns. Your little outburst at Judge Mitchell raised some red flags. Red flags? Valentina bristled. Since when is standing up for myself a symptom of mental illness? Patricia cut in before it escalated. Valentina, listen to me. The prosecution is building a narrative. They're trying to paint you as a pathological liar with delusions of grandeur. They're going to claim you truly believe you speak these languages, even though, in their eyes, you can't. That is absolute garbage. Valentina slapped her hand on the cold metal. I'm not crazy. No one used that word, Dr. Vasquez said, her tone infuriatingly even. But I still have a job to do. I'm going to run through a series of questions. I need total honesty. For the next hour, Valentina was dissected. She talked about the orphanage, her parents' deaths, the years with her grandmother, and the crushing loneliness of being a savant with no future. Dr. Vasquez scribbled, cryptic notes in her pad, her face a perfect, unreadable mask. One final thing, she said, looking up. Do you often feel isolated? Like you occupy a different reality than the people around you? Valentina weighed her words. Every single day. But not because I'm delusional. It's because I've survived in worlds most people pretend don't exist. I speak tongues that most people will never bother to learn. I know how words can build bridges or burn them down. So, yeah, my world is different, but it's real. Just as real as the bias that threw me in this cage. The doctor snapped her notebook shut. Thank you, Valentina. The court will have my report by morning. As the doctor exited, Patricia leaned in, her face etched with worry. There's bad news. Judge Mitchell reached out to State University, but not just to find experts. What do you mean? He dug into your history. He found a paper trail. Patricia pulled a file from her briefcase. Back when you were 17, you applied for a grant at the International Language Academy. Ring a bell? Valentina nodded slowly. I remember. They laughed me out of the room. They said my application was a joke, claimed it was impossible for a teenager to speak that many dialects. Exactly. And now, Mitchell is weaponizing that rejection. He's using it to prove a long-standing pattern of fraud. The walls felt like they were closing in on Valentina. Every time she tried to climb out of the hole, the system kicked dirt in her face. Her own ambition was being twisted into evidence of a crime. Is that it? Or is there more? She braced herself for the blow. Patricia hesitated. It's about the linguistic experts they're sending. Mitchell didn't just ask for strict professors. He hand-picked the academic executioners known for flunking everyone. They aren't coming to give you a fair shot, Valentina. They're coming to take you apart. The silence that followed felt heavy enough to crush bone. Valentina felt the massive boot of the legal system pressing down on her neck, trying to stomp out that little spark of defiance still burning in her chest. So, what's the timeline? She finally asked. 2 days? Hearing is the day after tomorrow. I can't waste a second. Valentina stood up, finding her spine again despite the odds. Patricia, I need a favor. Get me books, study guides, Everything you can find in every language relevant to this case. If they want a war, I'm going to armor up." Patricia looked at her, torn between respect and pity. "Valentina, listen. Even if you dazzle them with your linguistics, the prosecutor has other ammo. The fraud reports, the complaints about botched translations." "Botched translations?" Valentina cut in. "What are you talking about? 3 clients claim your work had critical errors that cost them money and their reputation." It felt like someone had just winded Valentina with a sledgehammer. "That's absolute garbage. I triple-checked every single document. I was obsessive. I would never hand over sloppy work. Do you have the files? Everything is on my laptop, but the cops seized it as evidence." Patricia scribbled a note. "I'll file a motion to access those drives. If we prove the work was clean, it pulls the teeth right out of the prosecution's argument." Back in her cell, Carmen was waiting with raised eyebrows. "Bad news?" "Getting worse." Valentina collapsed onto her bunk. "I don't just have to prove I speak 10 languages to a panel that wants me to fail. I also have to defend work I know was perfect against fraud charges, all while dodging a psych eval designed to paint me as delusional." Carmen let out a low whistle. "You weren't kidding about the fire inside you, but Val, are you sure this is the hill you want to die on? Maybe take a plea? Do a little time, then move on? Surrender?" Valentina stared at the ceiling. "Admit the system is right and I'm wrong? I can't do that, Carmen. Folding now would be spitting on my grandmother's memory. It betrays every girl who has the talent but lacks the pedigree to prove it." "Then get some rest." Carmen killed the lights. "Because in 2 days, you're going to need every ounce of grit you've got." In the dark, Valentina squeezed her eyes shut, but sleep wouldn't come. Her brain was a whirlwind of vocabulary, syntax, and idioms, cycling through every language she had ever mastered. But mostly, she thought about every time she had been underestimated, ignored, or brushed aside. The world was about to see exactly what she was made of. She just hoped it would be enough. Dawn crept into the detention center with that heavy, suffocating silence you only find where freedom is a memory. Valentina hadn't slept a wink. Her eyes burned with exhaustion, but her mind was still running drills, conjugations, grammar structures, slang in Mandarin, Arabic, German, French. Carmen was snoring softly on the bottom bunk, a steady, human sound in a world of uncertainty. Valentina had spent the night whispering to herself, every language flowing like tributaries rushing into the ocean of her memory. The sound of boots in the hall broke her focus. "Way too early for breakfast." The steel door groaned open, and Officer Torres stood there, looking grim. "Reyes, visitor, consult room, now." Carmen jerked awake at the noise. Who shows up before the sun's even up? Valentina climbed down, her heart starting to hammer. She trailed Torres through the hollow corridors, their footsteps echoing like the beat of war drums. When they hit the consultation room, Valentina stopped dead in her tracks. Sitting across the table was an Asian man looking absolutely distressed, clutching a briefcase on his lap. She knew him instantly. "Engineer Chen?" Valentina whispered, stunned. David Chen shot up, hands shaking. He was one of the 3 clients who had flagged her work as fraudulent. He was with a tech firm that needed English docs converted to Mandarin for a massive expansion in China. "Ms. Reyes, I need to talk to you." His voice was jagged, like speaking was physically painful. "I don't have much time. My lawyer doesn't know I'm here." Torres shut the door but stayed inside. Standard procedure for off-book visits. What the hell is he doing here? Valentina eased into the chair, struggling to wrap her head around the sheer absurdity of the moment. Chen dragged his hands down his face, and Valentina instantly clocked the exhaustion etched into his features, the heavy bags under his eyes, the rigid set of his shoulders. "I'm here to speak the truth I should have led with from the start." The silence that hung between them was so heavy Valentina could practically hear the blood rushing in her ears. "Your translations were flawless." Chen exhaled the confession like a man who hadn't taken a proper breath in months. "Every single document you handled for my firm was impeccable. Better than any of the high-end agencies we've burned through. Our Beijing partners were actually blown away by the technical precision and cultural nuance." Valentina felt the floor drop out from under her. "Then why lie?" "Because my boss, the CEO, found out I brought you on board without vetting your college degree first." Chen stared at the floor, shame carved into every crease of his expression. "He threatened to sack me on the spot if I couldn't justify burning company cash on an uncertified freelancer. So, to save my own skin, I had to torch your reputation." A hot mix of rage and validation surged in Valentina's chest. It wasn't that black and white. Chen looked up, his eyes glassed over with tears he refused to let fall. Roberto Fuentes, our corporate shark of a lawyer, pitched the idea of flagging the translations as defective. He claimed it was the only play to claw back the funds and shield the company from liability. He suggested lying. Valentina's voice cracked, rising an octave. He suggested protecting the bottom line. Chen corrected her with a bitter edge. In the corporate world, Miss Reyes, the truth takes a back seat to financial survival. But I haven't slept a wink since I signed that affidavit. I have a daughter about your age. Every time I look at her, I see your face plastered on the news, getting dragged through the mud for a crime you didn't commit. Valentina took a jagged breath, fighting to keep a lid on the emotions threatening to break her. Why come to me now? Why not before the trial started? Because I'm a coward. Chen's voice cracked on the admission. I needed the paycheck, the title, the reputation. But watching what they did to you, seeing Judge Mitt mocking you on national television, that was the breaking point. My wife told me last night she couldn't stay with a man who has no honor, and she was right. He pulled a thick manila envelope from his briefcase. It's all in here. Copies of the original work, complete with sign-offs from our Beijing partners. Emails where they specifically rave about your performance, plus my sworn affidavit admitting I perjured myself under corporate duress. Valentina accepted the envelope, her hands trembling. It felt heavy, packed with pages that could flip her case upside down. Engineer Chen, do you realize the fallout this will cause for you? She asked softly. Admitting to perjury could land you in prison. I'm aware. Chen offered a sad, weary smile. But I'd rather sit in a cell with my conscience clear than walk free as a liar. My daughter deserves a father she can actually look up to. Torres stepped up to the table. Sir, I need to escort you out. This visit is highly irregular as it is. Chen stood, but locked eyes with Valentina one last time before turning away. Miss Reyes, you are extraordinary. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. And if I may offer a piece of advice, when you step into that courtroom tomorrow, don't just prove you speak the languages. Show them why it matters. Show them that raw talent doesn't need a piece of paper to be valid. After he left, Valentina sat alone in the room, clutching the envelope like it was a life preserver in a storm. The tears she'd been bottling up for days finally spilled over. They weren't tears of sorrow, but a cocktail of relief and pure rage at everything she'd endured because of some corporate fabrication. The door burst open again and Patricia Mendoza rushed in, hair a mess, wearing a look of controlled panic. Valentina, what the hell just happened? Torres called and said David Chen was here. What did he want? Valentina handed over the envelope. Our salvation. As Patricia frantically scanned the documents, her eyes grew wider with every page she turned. This is a game changer. With this, we can completely dismantle the fraud charges. We can prove the work was sound and that the entire accusation was manufactured. But will it be enough? Valentina asked. I still have to prove I can actually speak the languages. And the prosecutor will likely argue Chen is lying now, just to help me out. You're right. Patricia sat down, her mind racing. We need more leverage. We need to track down the other two clients who accused you. But how do we pull that off from inside here? Patricia whipped out her phone. Leave that to me. I've got contacts. If Chen had a sudden attack of conscience, maybe the others are cracking too. Over the next few hours, as Valentina was escorted back to her cell, Patricia worked like a woman possessed, making calls, firing off emails, and pulling every string in her legal arsenal. Back inside the heavy silence of the cell, Carmen watched her cellmate with a new kind of scrutiny. The air had shifted. You look different, she murmured. Something's changed behind the eyes. One of the suits came clean, Valentina said, sinking onto her cot, the reality still settling in. Admitted, he lied. My work wasn't flawed, it was flawless. They framed me to save their own profit margins. Carmen let out a low, knowing whistle. The machine protecting its gears. Same old song, Carmen replied. Except this time someone actually grew a spine and spoke up. Valentina gazed up at the slice of sky through the bars. He put his neck on the line for me. Does that give you hope? It's better than hope. It's validation. Proof that I'm not the crazy one. I'm not broken. The system is. The clang of metal on concrete echoed down the block. It was the book cart, the twice-weekly lifeline for the lockup. A young woman leaned into the heavy frame, pausing at every grate. When the wheels squeaked to a halt in front of cell 47, Valentina knew the face. Sophia Morales. A kid, really, barely 19, who usually worked the mess hall shift. She had sharp eyes burdened by that heavy, aged look you only see on kids who've had to grow up too fast. You guys need anything to read? Sophia's voice was barely a whisper. Do you have anything in foreign languages? Valentina asked, a spark of anticipation in her tone. Recognition flashed across Sophia's face. Wait, you're the one proving you speak 10 languages, right? 11, actually. I've got something for you. Sophia glanced anxiously up and down the corridor before pulling a brown paper parcel from beneath the stack. Your lawyer called in a favor. I could get written up for this, but hell, I believe in the underdog. Valentina peeled back the paper to reveal 6 thick volumes: Mandarin, Arabic, Russian, German, French, and Portuguese. These weren't novels, they were dense, technical legal manuals. Your lawyer said to study these, Sophia hissed through the bars. The professors are planning to bury you tomorrow with specialized jargon. How do you know that? Because one of the examiners, Professor Villarreal, was here a few days ago consulting with the warden. I overheard him bragging about how he was going to expose the fraud who claims to have impossible linguistic gifts. Valentina felt the blood drain from her face. What else did he say? He's prepping specialized technical manuscripts. Medical, legal, scientific, stuff only someone with a PhD would know offhand. Carmen shot up from her bunk. That's a setup. They're rigging the game so you lose. It's not rigging if the game was never fair to begin with, Valentina noted grimly. She cracked open the first volume, scanning the Mandarin characters. But I can learn this. I've always been a sponge. You have less than 24 hours, Sophia pointed out. How can you absorb 6 languages worth of technical data in a single day? Valentina looked up, that quiet, burning defiance in her eyes, the only thing that had kept her standing this long. The same way I've survived everything else. I just don't quit. As Sophia wheeled the cart away, Carmen watched Valentina dive into the texts, the world around her fading away. You know what's actually scary about you? Carmen asked after a long stretch of silence. It's not the languages, it's that you refuse to stay down. My grandmother used to say the world will tell you no 1,000 times. You only have to prove it yes once. Valentina vanished into the pages for the rest of the day and deep into the night. She barely touched her food, barely shifted her weight. Carmen acted as her anchor, bringing water, reminding her to breathe. But Valentina was gone, lost in a matrix of syntax, definitions, and linguistic bridges. As the first gray light of dawn bled through the high window, Valentina snapped the final book shut. Her eyes were bloodshot, her hands shaking from exhaustion, but the fear was gone. Ready? Carmen asked. Ready, Valentina confirmed. Officer Torres arrived early, keys jangling. Reyes, let's go. Council is waiting. Big day. As she marched down the corridor, a rhythm started. Inmates banging their cups and fists against the steel doors. It wasn't a riot, it was a salute. The block knew her story. They all knew what it felt like to be defined by a rap sheet instead of their character. Give 'em hell, someone shouted. Don't let the bastards win, another voice echoed. A surge of electricity shot through Valentina's spine. She wasn't fighting this solo. In a way she never had been. Every faceless prisoner behind those bars was banking on her victory, hoping for their own chance to rewrite the narrative. Patricia was waiting in the processing area holding something that looked out of place. A suitcase. What's the baggage for? Valentina asked. Your future, assuming we pull this off. Patricia unzipped the bag to reveal a sharp, tailored suit. You're not walking into that room looking like a convict. You're walking in as a peer. As Valentina shed the prison gray, Patricia briefed her on the final play. Tracked down client number 2. He's ready to go on record that the accusations were bogus. Still, radio silence from the third guy, but 2 out of 3 builds reasonable doubt. Now, about that psych eval. Patricia grimaced. Dr. Vasquez filed her report. It's a mixed bag. She doesn't label you legally insane, but she isn't exactly vouching for your stability either. Her words? Unconventional personality traits with inflated confidence in self-taught methodologies. Fancy way of saying they think I'm full of it. Precisely. Which is why good won't cut it today. You need to be flawless. The transport van rumbled toward the courthouse. In the pale dawn light, the building looked less like a hall of justice and more like a Roman Colosseum, a stone beast where gladiators were thrown to the lions. But the Valentina walking in today wasn't the terrified girl from last week. She had evidence. She had allies. And crucially, she had the truth on her side. Inside, the courtroom was packed tighter than a sardine can. News crews had jammed their cameras into every available inch of space. Reporters buzzed with gossip while the front row hosted 10 state university professors. their faces wearing looks ranging from mild curiosity to sneering contempt. Judge Mitchell swept in with his usual swagger, but when he locked eyes with Valentina, his gaze faltered. Maybe he realized this wasn't going to be the slam-dunk conviction he'd banked on. "Let the circus begin," he muttered, banging his gavel. And just like that, the day that would rewrite history kicked off. Mitchell's gavel cracked through the air like a gunshot in the crowded room. The chatter died instantly, replaced by a tension so thick you could practically taste the electricity in the air. "Order in the court." Mitchell's voice carried that polished, heavy authority perfected over decades on the bench. He scanned the room before focusing on the 10 professors lined up in the VIP seats. "Distinguished faculty of State University, thank you for joining us. We are here to conduct an evaluation that, frankly, I find to be a complete waste of the court's time, but which the defendant has insisted upon." Valentina stood beside Patricia, spine steel straight, ignoring the exhaustion seeping into her bones. 24 hours awake, cramming technical jargon that takes most scholars years to master. But she wasn't most scholars. Professor Andres Villarreal stood, adjusting his glasses with that specific brand of smugness only found in tenure-track academics. A slight man with dark hair slicked back so tight it looked painful. He wore the expression of a man who believed a degree was the only measure of a human being's worth. "Your Honor," he began, his voice clipped and precise, "my colleagues and I have prepared a rigorous battery of tests. This isn't about ordering coffee in a foreign tongue. We demand technical mastery, deep cultural nuance, and specialized translation capabilities. Get on with it." Mitchell waved a hand, leaning back like he was about to watch a street magician fail a card trick. Villarreal flipped open a thick binder. "Ms. Reyes, we begin with Mandarin. Professor Yuki Tanaka, primarily a Japanologist, is also fluent in Mandarin and will conduct this segment." A middle-aged Asian woman rose from the bench. Professor Tanaka projected calm, but her eyes were sharp, surgically dissecting Valentina second by second. She spoke in flawless Mandarin, instructing Valentina to read a medical excerpt and interpret its meaning into Spanish. She extended a sheet of paper. Valentina took it. It was dense, a complex breakdown of cardiovascular procedures packed with jargon that would make a certified medical interpreter break into a cold sweat. The room went dead silent. Valentina scanned the page for 30 seconds. Then, without a tremor, she began. Her Mandarin flowed, tones sharp, pronunciation crisp. She didn't just read, she interpreted, weaving in cultural context on how Eastern medical concepts diverged from Western terminology. She switched to Spanish seamlessly, translating not just the vocabulary, but the underlying pathology, breaking down medical implications with a precision that made Professor Tanaka's jaw drop. Tanaka leaned over, murmuring in Mandarin to Villarreal that Valentina's accent was flawless, statistically impossible for someone without formal education. "I know." Valentina shot back in the same dialect, locking eyes with Tanaka before switching to Spanish. "I learned from the Chens, a diplomatic family stationed in Beijing for 6 years. Their little girl didn't just teach me vocabulary, she taught me songs, games, and how to think like them. Language isn't just data, Professor, it's a soul." A ripple of whispers swept through the crowd. Reporter Marco Delgado's pen flew across his notepad, smoke practically rising from the paper. This was journalistic dynamite. "Next language." Villarreal barked the order, shifting in his seat like a man trying to escape his own skin. "German. Professor Hans Müller." Müller looked like he had been carved out of the Black Forest, an imposing frame, flaxen beard, and a scowl that could curdle milk. He rose and launched into a dense thicket of German, layering on a dialect so thick you could chew it, demanding she dissect the fine print of a legal agreement. He shoved a document at her, a nightmare of legalese that would make even a Berlin attorney break out in a cold sweat. Valentina scanned the pages, and her retort wasn't just accurate, it was surgical. She didn't merely swap words, she dismantled the text, pinpointing loopholes and flagging vagueness that could spark a lawsuit, flipping between the two tongues as effortlessly as breathing. Muller stared, his stern mask cracking into bewilderment. He demanded, in his native tongue, to know the source of such expertise. "The Schneider household," she replied, her German flawless before switching to Spanish for the court. "Herr Schneider was an international counsel. His wife would park me in his study to keep me quiet while he drafted briefs. I was 10 years old reading statutes while he thought I was doodling. I learned that legal German is a jigsaw puzzle where every syllable carries a specific burden." Patricia Mendoza watched from the gallery, eyes swimming with unshed tears. This went beyond hope. It was a revelation. Valentina wasn't just surviving the gauntlet, she was owning it. Arabic, Villarreal sneered, tossing the word out like garbage. Enter Professor Amira Hassan, poised, sharp, and possessing a gaze that dissected you. She spoke in classical Arabic, the high tongue of ancient scriptures and dusty scrolls, deliberately choosing words that hadn't been common conversation for centuries. She challenged Valentina to interpret a sacred passage and unravel its deepest philosophical threads. It was a labyrinth of metaphysical commentary. Valentina shut her eyes for a heartbeat, and when they snapped open, the room felt a shift in her presence. She began to recite, her voice catching the rhythmic, song-like lilt that the language demands when spoken purely. She didn't just translate. She peeled back the centuries, detailing the historical arguments and theological wars sparked by those very lines. She discussed the nuances distinguishing the classical root from the modern dialect, highlighting the inherent lyricism of the verses. Hassan rose to her feet, visibly shaken. "Impossible," she whispered. "That takes a lifetime of seminary devotion." "The Al-Rahman family," Valentina explained softly. "The father was an imam. He taught me that Arabic isn't just a speech, it's a lens for the cosmos. Every word has a root, a history, a family. It is a language where poetry is the oxygen." Judge Mitchell had abandoned his slouch, leaning over the bench. The sneer was gone, replaced by a grudging, stunned respect. The experts came in waves, each bringing their own distinct brand of impossible. Professor Igor Volkov demanded a deconstruction of classic Russian symbolism, followed by a French interrogation on viticulture so obscure only a master sommelier would survive it. Italian came next, steeped in the drama of opera. Then came Brazilian Portuguese, thick with street slang and the multi-script nightmare of Japanese. Korean followed with its dizzying hierarchy of honorifics. Every single time, Valentina didn't just pass, she soared. And with every victory, she offered a glimpse into the humble domestic world where she'd absorbed these treasures, not in a classroom, but in service. When Volkov pointed to a chapter of heavy Russian prose, she didn't just convert the nouns and verbs. She channeled the crushing, beautiful melancholy of the original work, unlocking emotional depths that are usually invisible to outsiders. "The Ivanov household," she clarified. Mr. Ivanov taught literature. He would read Dostoevsky aloud while his wife simmered borscht. I was 12 years old, weeping over the tragedies in the corner. He told me that if you don't feel the Russian soul bleeding through the ink, you aren't really reading. The French evaluator presented a treatise on oenology so technical it seemed engineered to break even the most seasoned translator. Valentina didn't blink. She pinned down every varietal, every terroir, and articulated why the French vocabulary for wine refuses to be tamed by Spanish equivalents. "Monsieur Dubois was a sommelier," she said, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. "He let me study the bouquet while he catalogued his cellar. He claimed wine-speak is liquid poetry, earth, sun, and time captured in a bottle. You don't translate it, you experience it." But then came the pivot point. The final hurdle was Hebrew. Villarreal, who prided himself on his command of the ancient tongue, didn't call another expert. He stood up to finish her himself. He had saved his ace in the hole for the very end. "Miss Reyes," he said, offering a smile that stopped dead before reaching his cold eyes, "this final piece is particularly unforgiving. It is an archaic philosophical treatise on ethics and justice, notoriously dense even for dedicated scholars." He slid the document across the table. Valentina began to scan the text, and suddenly her features shifted. It wasn't confusion or struggle, it was the sharp focus of memory. "Professor Villarreal," she said, measuring her words, "this text. I know this text." "Do you now?" Villarreal smirked, dripping with condescension. "I find it highly unlikely someone of your station had access to rare Hebrew manuscripts." "No," she corrected, "not the manuscript." Valentina looked up, her gaze hardening into something lethal. "I know the translation, because I wrote it." The silence that strangled the room was absolute. It was as if the air conditioning itself was holding its breath. "Excuse me." Villarreal blinked, thrown off balance. Valentina tapped the paper. 6 years ago, I was 17, working a ghostwriting gig for an online translation mill. An anonymous client commissioned a translation of this exact treatise, ancient Hebrew into modern Spanish. The pay was decent, but the non-disclosure agreement was strict, total anonymity required. I spent 3 weeks bleeding over the syntax, researching every concept. It was one of my first professional contracts. She pivoted toward Villarreal, her voice gathering steel. And you, Professor? 4 years ago, you published a paper titled New Interpretations of Hebraic Ethical Texts. I read that paper. You used my translation, verbatim, without citation. The room erupted in scandalized whispers. The color drained from Villarreal's face. That is a preposterous accusation, he stammered. Do you have a shred of proof? I have my entire work archive. Valentina replied with terrifying calm. Translation notes, rough drafts, client correspondence, all stored on my laptop, the same laptop currently held in evidence by the prosecution. Patricia Mendoza shot out of her chair. Your Honor, I demand immediate access to those digital files. If my client's claim holds water, this doesn't just prove her competence. It exposes academic fraud. Prosecutor Bradford looked like a trapped rat. Your Honor, this is a sideshow. It's irrelevant to the case. Irrelevant? Judge Mitchell finally found his voice. Mr. Bradford, if the defendant can prove that one of my court-appointed evaluators built his career on her uncredited labor, that is the definition of relevant. It establishes that she isn't just competent now, she has been mastering this material for years. He turned his icy gaze on the professor. Professor Villarreal, care to comment? Villarreal's mouth worked uselessly, like a fish on a dock. His colleagues stared at him with a mix of shock and professional revulsion. In the ivory tower, plagiarism was the only capital crime. I received that text from a colleague. I was unaware it came from an online service. I assumed it was public domain. You assumed? Professor Hassan stood up, her tone razor sharp. Professor Villarreal, academic protocol demands source verification. That is Research 101. Professor Muller added, his voice grave. If this allegation stands, the State University will be forced to launch a formal inquiry. Mitchell banged the gavel. Order! Bailiff Cooper, retrieve the evidence laptop. In the lull that followed, Valentina stood tall. Her heart was hammering against her ribs, but her face was a mask of composure. She had waited 6 years for this reckoning. 6 years since seeing her intellect sold under another man's byline. She never imagined vindication would look like this, but fate had a funny way of balancing the books. Cooper returned with the laptop sealed in an evidence bag. The court technician booted it up, and under judicial supervision, Patricia navigated to the archived folders. It was all there. The time-stamped drafts from 6 years prior, the meticulous footnotes justifying every syntactical choice, the emails with the anonymous buyer and the smoking gun. The final submission, identical, word for word, to the text Villarreal had claimed as his own original scholarship. Judge Mitchell scrolled through the files personally, his expression growing stormier with every document. Finally, he looked up at Villarreal. Professor, I strongly suggest you contact your union representative. You are going to need a lawyer. He addressed the other 9 experts. Does anyone else harbor doubts regarding Ms. Reyes' linguistic capabilities? One by one, the professors shook their heads. Professor Hassan even rose to her feet. Your Honor, in my 20 years of evaluating language proficiency, I have never witnessed the mastery this young woman displayed today. She doesn't just speak these languages, she inhabits them. She understands them at a depth most academics spend a lifetime chasing. She climbed this mountain barefoot. No funding, no safety net, just grit and a hunger to know more. Hassan's testimony lingered in the silence like a heavy fog. Judge Mitchell sank deep into his leather chair, running a weary hand down his face. The absolute certainty he'd worn like a robe for 30 years was gone. Mr. Bradford, he finally croaked, please tell me you have something else. The prosecutor rose, but his posture screamed defeat. The fight had left him. Your Honor, given that our key witnesses have admitted to perjury under corporate coercion, the state moves to dismiss all charges with prejudice. The gallery didn't just whisper, it erupted. Mitchell hammered the gavel, the wooden crack cutting through the noise. Order! I will have order! When the room finally settled, the judge fixed his gaze on Valentina. The contempt was gone, replaced by something foreign to him. Ms. Reyes, he began, his tone stripped of its usual steel. The court owes you an apology. I owe you one. I let my own elitism blind me to the truth. I operated under the assumption that genius requires a stamp of approval from a university. You've proven that true brilliance doesn't need a permission slip. He swallowed hard, the next words tasting bitter. All charges are hereby dismissed. You are free to go. The bailiff is ordered to return your laptop and personal effects immediately. One final strike of the gavel. Case closed. The courtroom walls seemed to shake with the applause. Patricia grabbed Valentina, holding her tight as they both broke down. Meanwhile, the press scrambled for the doors to break the story. The same academics who had doubted her were now circling like vultures, offering tenure tracks and apologies in the same breath. But Valentina barely heard them. After a lifetime of being invisible, she had finally roared, and the world had no choice but to listen in 11 different tongues. The heavy steel gates of New Hope Detention Center groaned open, the sweetest sound she'd ever heard. She took that first step onto the pavement, shaking off the weight of days that had dragged on like centuries. The afternoon sun hit her hard, a blinding welcome back to the living. She expected peace, vindication. What she got was a riot. The press corps surged forward like a tidal wave, a sea of flashing bulbs and thrusting microphones, shouting over one another in a frenzy. "Ms. Reyes, over here! How does it feel to beat the system? Are you suing Judge Mitchell? Can you really speak 11 languages fluently?" Patricia became a human shield, shouldering through the mob to get them to the idling car. They barely made it 2 yards before a figure planted herself firmly in their path. She was striking. Silver hair coiffed to perfection, wearing a tailored suit that cost more than Valentina's entire education. The badge on her silk lapel read, "Linda Harrington, CEO, Harrington Global Translation Services." "Miss Reyes?" Her voice didn't shout, yet it cut through the bedlam effortlessly. "I'm Linda Harrington. We need to speak, now." Patricia stepped in. "Mrs. Harrington, my client has been through hell." "This isn't the time." "I realize that," Harrington countered, "but this won't keep." She locked eyes with Valentina, dismissing the lawyer entirely. "You've become a global phenomenon. I have 17 contracts from foreign governments in my bag, but more importantly, I have information about your grandmother." Valentina froze. The noise of the crowd faded. "My abuela? What could you possibly know?" Harrington gestured to a sleek black town car waiting down the street. 5 minutes, that's all I ask. Hear me out, and I'll have my driver take you wherever you want to go." Patricia squeezed Valentina's arm, a silent warning, but the look in the CEO's eyes wasn't predatory. It was regretful. "Okay," Valentina breathed. 5 minutes. Inside the hushed interior of the limo, shielded from the madness, Harrington handed over a leather portfolio. 20 years ago, I ran HR for the biggest translation firm in the city. Lucia Reyes came to us looking for work, and we turned her away at the door. A sharp ache hit Valentina's chest. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because we made the same mistake the court just did. She was fluent in 6 languages, a prodigy, but she didn't have the parchment to prove it, so we didn't even give her a test. She sent me a letter afterwards. I've kept it in my safe for 2 decades as a reminder of my own arrogance." Harrington slid a yellowed, fragile envelope across the seat. The script was unmistakable, her grandmother's hand. "Read it," Harrington urged, her perfectly manicured hands trembling slightly. Valentina cracked the seal. As she scanned the lines, her grandmother's voice seemed to rise from the paper, heavy with hard-won truths and old scars. "Dear Mrs. Harrington, I hold no grudge for the rejection. I understand that your world runs on diplomas, not actual skill. Just know this. I'm dedicating my remaining years to one goal. My granddaughter will never have to beg for a seat at the table she's already earned. I'll pass down every scrap of knowledge I have, and when she rises, I hope it reminds you that brilliance exists without a rubber stamp from the establishment." By the end of the page, Valentina's face was wet with silent tears. Grandma Lucia knew. She'd spent decades armoring Valentina for a society designed to keep people like them on the outside. "The moment your face flashed on the news," Harrington said, her tone dropping to a whisper, "I recognized the lineage. You're Lucia's legacy. The little girl from the letter. I realized fate was handing me a chance to fix a mistake I made 20 years ago." "So, what's the play?" Valentina asked, her guard going back up. "What do you want?" "I want to bring you on board, not just as a translator, but as my head of unconventional talent. Your mandate is simple. Find the outliers. The geniuses without the degrees. The ones the system chews up and spits out because they don't fit the mold." It was the kind of job offer you dream about, but Valentina's survival instincts kicked in. Harrington was holding something back. "What's the catch?" she pressed. Harrington managed a faint smile. "Sharp, just like her. All right, there's another layer. Lucia served many high-profile households, but one assignment was distinct. The Morrisons, British Diplomatic Corps. She spent the last 5 years of her life in their service. They fled the country quite suddenly 3 years ago, but they left a package behind. Something Lucia entrusted to them to be held until you were ready. Yeah, Mr. Morrison called me yesterday after he saw the news coverage. He's back in town, and he's asking for a sit-down. Before Valentina could process the information, her phone, which the cops had just handed back, started vibrating off the hook. Missed calls stacked up, texts flooded in. Her social media notifications were lighting up like a Christmas tree. One text cut through the noise. Unknown sender, international country code. Miss Reyes, Agent Samuel Cross here, International Refugee Organization. Your story has struck a nerve with millions of people. We have a proposition that could shift the landscape for everyone. Please respond ASAP. Patricia, glued to her own screen, suddenly gasped. Val, you need to see this, now! She shoved the phone in Valentina's face. The footage from the hearing was everywhere. 15 million views in under 6 hours. A justice for Valentina was the #1 global trend. But that wasn't the kicker. A new clip had dropped just minutes ago. Someone had hacked the detention center's server and leaked the security feed. The grainy footage showed Valentina huddled in the dark, studying through the night, whispering conjugations in half a dozen tongues. It was raw, obsessive determination. The whole world is watching, Patricia whispered, eyes wide. You're not just a person anymore, Val. You're a symbol. I didn't ask to be a poster child, Valentina sighed, the exhaustion hitting her bones. I just wanted my life back. That ship has sailed, I'm afraid. Harrington cut in, ever the pragmatist. You have a microphone now. The only question left is, how will you use it? The phone buzzed again, interrupting them. This time the ID was familiar. It was Carmen, her cellmate. Val, you need to get down here. Carmen, what's going on? It's the director. Turns out the bastard has secrets too. Big ones. I think it ties back to your grandma, but I can't say more on an open line. Just come. The line went dead. Valentina looked at Patricia, the blood draining from her face. Something's wrong. She sounded terrified. Before they could formulate a plan, a shadow fell over the limousine window. An older gentleman, maybe in his mid-60s, with a kind but anxious face, rapped his knuckles against the glass. Harrington lowered the pane. Dr. Ruiz? Mrs. Harrington, thank you for taking my call, the man said, his accent clipped and posh. Miss Reyes, I'm Fernando Ruiz. I served as the Morrison family physician for many years. I was also the one who treated Lucia in her final months. Valentina stepped out of the car, the ground feeling unsteady beneath her feet. You knew her? Quite well, and there are details regarding her passing that you've been kept in the dark about. She made me swear to tell you when the time was right. Tell me what? Dr. Ruiz scanned the street, eyes darting. Not here. There are powerful interests who would prefer this history stays buried. It wasn't just a simple cardiac arrest, Ms. Reyes. There were complications, things she hid from everyone. Complications tied directly to what she uncovered during her time with the Morrisons. Valentina felt her pulse hammering in her throat. What did she find? Evidence. Proof that diplomatic immunity was being used to shield a trafficking ring. She had actually blown the whistle on them to the proper authorities, but she passed away before she could ever take the stand. Valentina felt the ground drop out from under her. Wade, are you implying my grandmother was— I can't say that for a fact, he replied. Dr. Ruiz cut in before she could spiral. What I do know is she stashed proof away. Hard evidence the Morrisons were desperate to bury after she was gone. And seeing as you're making headlines now, there are powerful people who will do anything to keep those secrets underground. Patricia immediately stepped in, placing herself between Valentina and the doctor in a defensive stance. Doctor, those are heavy claims. You got anything to back them up? I have Lucia's entire medical history, he countered. And the letters she sent me right before the end. She was explicit in her writing. She said if anything happened to her, I was to find her granddaughter, but only when she was tough enough to handle the reality of it. He pulled a thick manila envelope from his briefcase. This is just the tip of the iceberg, Miss Reyes. Your grandmother was meticulous. She logged everything. Names, dates, trafficking routes. It's all there. She locked the master file in a safety deposit box overseas. You are the only person with the clearance to open it. Valentina took the package. It felt heavy in her hands, loaded with a history she wasn't sure she was ready to carry. Where is it? Geneva, Switzerland. The Helvetia International Bank, he answered. She gave me specific orders on her deathbed. She told me, when Valentina shows the world what she is made of, when she becomes too loud to ignore, that is when she earns the truth. The The quote hung in the air, filling the quiet luxury of the limo. All this time, Valentina thought Lucia was just a housekeeper who had a knack for languages. Just another invisible worker? She was wrong. She was a woman who witnessed the ugly side of power and actually had the guts to stand up to it, knowing full well it might cost her everything. "What else?" Valentina asked. Ruiz's face hardened. "That third client who went after you? The one who refused to drop the charges? His name is Richard Blackwood. He's an operative for a private security firm, the kind with deep hooks in the diplomatic sector. He stuck to his story when everyone else folded. That wasn't an accident." "Are you saying this was a setup?" A cold shiver traced down Valentina's spine. "I am saying as soon as you hit the radar, powerful players saw a chance to destroy your credibility before you became a threat. They needed to break you before you dug up your grandmother's past." Patricia immediately grabbed her phone. "We need a police escort right now." She didn't get to dial. A black SUV swerved in front of them, cutting off the limo with a screech of tires. A middle-aged man stepped out, stone-faced, federal badge bouncing against his chest. "Agent Samuel Cross," he announced. "Miss Reyes, you need to come with me. Your life is at risk." "How did you track me down?" Valentina snapped, survival instincts kicking in. "We have had a wire on channels related to your case. We just picked up chatter that you do not want to hear. There is an active price on your head. Someone is very invested in making sure you never make it to Geneva." Just when she thought she was free, the walls were closing in again. The truth was thousands of miles away, locked in a metal box, and people were ready to kill to keep it shut. She didn't hesitate. Valentina locked eyes with Cross. "I am not going anywhere until I talk to Carmen. She needs me." "Ms. Reyes, you do not understand the stakes here," Cross pressed. "There are killers looking for you right now." "And there is a friend who risked her life for me when nobody else gave a damn," Valentina fired back. "I am not leaving her behind." Patricia put a hand on her arm. "Val, maybe you should listen to the agent." "I will go with you," Dr. Ruiz chimed in, surprising them all. "If the detention center director is tied to your grandmother's discovery, you need answers. I can help keep you safe." Harrington snapped his phone shut. "I have contacts in private security. I can have a tactical team there in 10 minutes. Cross sighed, realizing he wasn't going to win this one. "Fine, but I am riding shotgun. If I see anything off, we abort immediately." 15 minutes later, they were pulling back up to the New Hope Detention Center. The building she had walked out of with such relief now loomed over her, radiating a menace she hadn't noticed before. Inside, the fluorescent strips buzzed and flickered, casting long, twitchy shadows against the sterile walls. Officer Daniela Cortez was waiting by the entrance. She was a young guard, one of the few who had actually treated Valentina like a human being. "Ms. Reyes, thank God you came," she whispered, looking over her shoulder. "Carmen is losing it. She keeps screaming that the director is involved with your grandmother. I haven't the faintest idea what she's on about, but she's refusing to open her mouth for anyone but you." Cross kept his voice even, strictly business. "Where can I find Director Mendez?" "Holed up in his office. He's been glued to the phone since sunrise. Ever since the Reyes story blew up on social media, the man's been a nervous wreck." Officer Cortez led the way, navigating a maze of hallways that Valentina wished she didn't recognize. Every turn brought back a memory she wanted to forget. They stopped at cell 47C. Carmen was curled up on her bunk, knees pulled tight to her chest, wearing a look that was 1 part terror and 2 parts resolve. The moment the lock buzzed, Carmen scrambled off the mattress. "Thank God, you actually came. I honestly didn't think you'd walk back into this place, not after everything they put you through." Valentina cut straight to the point. "Carmen, what's going on? What did you find?" Carmen's eyes darted around the room, wary of the audience. Cross flashed his badge, the gold shield catching the dim light. "You're safe. Anything you say stays between us. If you know something that can help, spit it out." Carmen took a shaky breath, steadying herself. 2 days ago, I was mopping the floors up by Director Mendez's suite. He left his door cracked open, and I overheard him on the phone. He was talking about you, Valentina. I heard him say, the old hag was a liability, and we can't let the granddaughter find out what she dug up. Valentina felt the blood drain from her face. The old hag. He meant my grandmother. That's what I figured, but I couldn't be 100% sure. Then, right after they let you go today, he started losing it. He made another call. This time, he wasn't whispering. I heard him say, Lucia Reyes, clear as day, and something about papers that were never supposed to fall into your hands. Dr. Ruiz stepped closer to the bars. Carmen, did you hear anything about the Morrison family or international networks? Yeah. Carmen nodded so hard her hair flopped over her eyes. He called the Morrisons idiots for holding on to those files, said they should have shredded the evidence when they had the chance. Cross didn't waste a second. He whipped out his cell and started barking orders into the receiver. Patricia sank onto the edge of the bunk, her brain already running through the statutes and indictments this would trigger. But Valentina was past legal theories. She was burning with a cold, hard rage. They had treated her grandmother like collateral damage. The realization that her death wasn't just a tragedy, it was a hit. Even now, years later, the rich and powerful were still casting shadows over their lives. "I want to see him," she said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "I'm having a word with Mendez. Right now." "Valentina, that's reckless," Patricia warned. "I don't give a damn about playing it safe." Valentina spun around to face Cross. "You've got the badge. Make it happen. I'm not leaving without answers about my grandmother." Cross weighed his options, jaw tight. Finally he nodded. "I'll ask the questions. You stick to my side like glue. If things go south, we bail immediately." Director Augusto Mendez held court on the 3rd floor. He was a heavy-set man with a receding hairline and the twitchy demeanor of someone sitting on a pile of dirty secrets. As soon as Cross barged in, badge leading the way, Mendez looked like he'd seen a ghost. "Agent, to what do I owe the pleasure?" His voice had a slight tremor. "Director Mendez, we need to talk about Lucia Reyes." The director blinked, stalling. "Lucia Reyes. The name doesn't ring a bell. You're a liar." Valentina pushed past Cross, ignoring his restraining hand. "My grandmother mopped the floors of this building for the last year of her life. You knew exactly who she was, and apparently you knew exactly what she found." Mendez shot out of his chair. "Miss, I have no idea what you're implying." "Then let me jog your memory." Cross pulled out a recorder, setting it on the desk with a heavy thud. "I've got witnesses who heard you discussing the old woman and some sensitive documents. Care to explain?" Beads of sweat started popping out on the director's forehead. His eyes darted from Cross to Valentina to the exit, looking for a way out like a trapped rat. I just run the facility. I didn't know what she did on her own time." "But you knew something." Valentina leaned over the mahogany desk, invading his space. "My grandmother died 2 years ago. It was sudden, convenient, right before she could blow the whistle on what she found. I didn't have anything to do with her death." Mendez was shouting now, losing his grip. "It was her heart. The doctor said it was natural causes." "So, you did know her?" Cross's gaze was icy. 30 seconds ago, you claimed the name didn't ring a bell." Mendez slumped back into his leather chair, defeated. "Fine, okay. I knew Lucia. She cleaned here for months. Quiet woman, kept her head down, until she came to my office one day with a file. Radioactive material. What kind of information?" Valentina fought back the tears stinging her eyes, refusing to show weakness. "She told me that while she was cleaning for the diplomatic families, she saw things she wasn't supposed to. Paperwork about illegal transport, families being used as fronts for criminal syndicates. She showed me the copies, begged me to help her get them to the authorities." "And did you?" Mendez stared at his hands, unable to look Valentina in the eye. "I told her I would, but I was terrified. These people, they own this city. They have money, connections. So I reported her to them instead." The silence that filled the room was suffocating. "You sold her out." Valentina's voice was barely a ghost of a sound. "She put her faith in you, and you just traded her away like livestock." "I was kept in the dark." Tears streamed down Mendez's face, a pathetic display. "The deal was just surveillance. Keep the old woman quiet, make sure she didn't rock the boat." "You never thought they'd put her in a grave?" Valentina cut him off, ice in her veins. "I honestly don't know if they pulled the trigger themselves." Mendez broke down completely, an ugly, open sob. "The official report said natural causes, but the guilt? I've been living with that question mark every single day." Cross didn't waste a second. He was already barking orders into his phone, demanding forensics and mobilizing a tactical team for an arrest. He called for a full-scale inquiry, but the noise faded into the background for Valentina, drowned out by the deafening pounding of her own heartbeat. Dr. Ruiz rested a steady hand on her shoulder to ground her. "Valentina, listen. There's one last piece of the puzzle, something your grandmother entrusted to me right before the end." He reached into his leather bag and produced a small, weather-beaten envelope. "She made me promise to hold on to this until you were strong enough to handle it. I believe that time is now, Valentina's fingers shook as she reached out and broke the seal. The handwriting inside was unmistakably her grandmother's, the same script that had graced family recipes, grocery lists, and birthday cards for years. "My dearest Valentina," the letter began, "if this paper is in your hands, it means I've already left this world. It means Dr. Ruiz kept his word, and more importantly, it means you've grown into the woman capable of shouldering the heavy truth. I spent your childhood drilling languages into your head. I taught you that vocabulary is ammunition, that speech builds bridges, and that to understand a stranger is to understand the world itself. But I never explained the urgency behind the lessons. In my youth, I watched terrible things happen. I saw the system crush people, and I couldn't lift a finger to stop it. I watched the wealthy exploit the poor, saw families torn apart by borders and bureaucracy, saw the innocent bleed. I was paralyzed because I was voiceless, invisible to the people in charge. But you, my darling, you possess a weapon I never had. You have the gift of tongues. You can advocate for the silenced. Your job isn't just translating sentences. It's translating pain into justice and silence into undeniable truth. Those files waiting for you in Geneva? They aren't just cold evidence of corporate crimes. They are the screams of people who have been ignored. You are the amplifier. You are the only one who can make the world listen. It won't be an easy road. Powerful people will try to shut you up, just like they tried to bury me. But you are built tougher than I ever was. You have the education, yes, but more importantly, you have the guts to use it. Don't shed tears for me, kid. If my heart gives out before the finish line, know that it stopped because it used every last beat to get you ready. And I'm at peace with that. Every conjugation drill, every folk tale, every hour we spent studying, it was all training for right now, for the moment you force the world to pay attention. So go, get to Geneva, unlock that box and spill their secrets. Give the voiceless a chance, and know that I am proud, not because you speak 10 or 20 languages, but because you chose to serve a cause bigger than your own ego. I love you, my sweet girl. Always have, always will. Grandma Lucia. Valentina lowered the paper, the dam finally breaking on the tears she had been holding back for days. It wasn't just grief anymore. It was clarity. A sense of mission fueled by a love that didn't stop at the grave. Carmen wrapped her arms around her, sobbing right along with her. Patricia let the tears fall unchecked, and even Cross, the stone-faced Fed, had to turn away and subtly wipe his eyes. Dr. Ruiz kept his voice low and respectful. She knew the clock was running out. Her heart was failing, and the pressure of this discovery accelerated it. But she refused to quit. She kept logging files and gathering proof until her last breath, confident that you would pick up the torch. Valentina refolded the letter with reverence, pressing it to her heart like a physical embrace. "I'm going to Geneva," she announced, her voice cutting through the emotion. "I'm finishing what she started." "You won't be doing it solo." Harrington strode into the room, looking like a man on a mission. "We have a corporate branch in Switzerland. I'll make sure you have unlimited resources and top-tier security. Count me in, too," Patricia added firmly. "You need a lawyer, and you need a friend." "Me 3, Carmen piped up, surprising everyone. "I'm out of here in 48 hours. After what these bastards did to your grandma, I want blood." Cross snapped his phone shut. "Bureau's officially interested. We'll provide a federal escort for the flight." Cross pivoted toward the sobbing director, handcuffs in hand. "Mendez, you're under arrest for conspiracy and obstruction of justice." As the officers dragged the man out of his own office in cuffs, Valentina felt a shift in her soul. She wasn't just some girl trying to prove she belonged anymore. She was the successor to a bloodline of grit and righteousness. Her grandmother had planted seeds of resistance, disguising them as vocabulary lessons. Those seeds had finally bloomed into a voice that refused to be muted. Just then, Harrington's pocket buzzed. He answered, listened for a second, and his face went cold. That was Morrison. She just touched down in the city. She claims she's holding on to one last piece of your grandmother's legacy, something too sensitive for a bank vault. She's asking to see you tonight. Valentina gave a silent nod. Every new secret peeled back another layer, revealing the true weight of the woman who raised her and the price she paid for it. "Let's move," she said. "We're burning daylight." Somewhere in a Geneva strongbox lay the kind of dangerous truths that shatter lives, and she wasn't about to keep them waiting. And Valentina Reyes? She was finally ready to be the microphone. Margaret Morrison's hotel was the sort of establishment that reeked of old money, where the walls whispered about dynasties and quiet power rather than shouting about wealth, Flanked by Patricia, Dr. Ruiz, and Harrington, Valentina stepped into a penthouse suite overlooking the city's glittering skyline. Margaret Morrison sat there, a vision of silver-haired refinement, every strand in place, looking out through blue eyes heavy with history. She carried the quiet, stiff upper lip dignity of someone who spent a lifetime serving the crown. The moment she locked eyes with Valentina, her composure cracked. Tears welled up. "You're the spitting image of her description." Margaret reached out, clasping Valentina's hands in a fragile grip. "Lucia never went a single day without mentioning you. She called you her greatest work, her living testament." Valentina leaned in. "Mrs. Morrison, tell me, who was she really?" Margaret gestured for them to sit, her hands betraying a slight tremor as she poured tea. "Your grandmother served my household for 5 years. But she wasn't just the help, she was family. My late husband was a British ambassador. Lucia traveled everywhere with us, but she possessed a certain talent nobody suspected." Talent? She could read a room better than a diplomat. And her linguistic skills? She understood every word spoken by men who thought the maid was deaf to their secrets. Margaret fell silent, her gaze drifting back to a darker time. "One evening, we were hosting a gala. Lucia was clearing glasses when she overheard 2 envoys speaking Russian. They were outlining a trafficking ring, using diplomatic immunity and embassy families to smuggle human beings across borders. You could hear a pin drop in the suite. Lucia came to my quarters later, shaking like a leaf. She spilled everything. My husband and we were sickened. He wanted to blow the whistle right then, but Lucia stopped him. She knew we needed concrete proof. So for months, she became a shadow. She chronicled everything. Names, dates, smuggling routes. She weaponized her invisibility. She'd pour coffee while they discussed crimes, assuming the servant girl was oblivious. Valentina frowned. "If you had the proof, why the silence?" Margaret stood, walking slowly to a small chest on the side table. "Because the rot went all the way to the top. Multiple governments were involved. We were alone. Trust was a luxury we couldn't afford. Then my husband collapsed." Her voice cracked. "A massive coronary during a summit. The coroner said heart failure, but I've always had my doubts. Days before, he'd sworn to go public. Damn the consequences." "Lucia was terrified," Margaret continued. "Not for her own life, mind you. She feared leaving you an orphan in a dangerous world. She entrusted me with this." She clicked the chest open. "I swore only to hand it over when you were tough enough to handle the fallout and when the world was ready to listen." She pulled out a sleek external drive and a heavy manila envelope. "It's all here. Surveillance tapes from the embassies, photos, logs. And the most damning part, first-hand accounts from the victims Lucia befriended. The ones she quietly saved over the years." Valentina accepted the drive, her hands unsteady. It was just a piece of plastic, but it felt heavy with human souls. "Is that it?" "Geneva holds the paper trail," Margaret said softly. "But that drive? That holds the voices, the raw stories of the people they tried to erase. Lucia recorded them with their consent in their mother tongues. She bet everything on you. She knew one day you'd be the one to translate their pain for the world to hear." Valentina didn't sleep that night. Headphones on, she sat in the dark, listening for hours. Mandarin, Arabic, Russian. Languages she knew like the back of her hand filled her ears. Tales of torn families, lies, and crushed dreams. And anchoring every recording was her grandmother's voice. Gentle, steady, promising that the truth would eventually come out. By sunrise, the tears on Valentina's cheeks had dried, leaving behind a cold, burning resolve. They were wheels up for Geneva the very next day. The entourage included Patricia, Harrington, and Carmen, freshly released as promised. Agent Cross handled the muscle, coordinating their security detail. Intelligence had finally cracked Richard Blackwood's cover. The third client was actually a private contractor paid to smear Valentina's reputation before she could take the mic. Authorities grabbed him just as he was trying to skip the country. Geneva greeted them with steel-gray skies, but the promise of justice hung heavy in the air. The Helvetia International Bank stood like a monument to old money, a cold fortress of marble and steel built to keep secrets buried for generations. Inside a hushed private viewing room, under the watchful eye of a Swiss notary, Valentina turned the key to safety deposit box number 4721. It wasn't gold inside. It was paper. Meticulously organized files, every single one labeled in her grandmother's distinct script, names, dates, coordinates. But the real gut punch was resting at the very bottom, a photo album, a timeline of her own life. Snapshots of her first day of school, practicing Arabic calligraphy, her nose buried in French literature. Every image bore a handwritten inscription on the back. The final print showed a 16-year-old Valentina, beaming, while clutching a certificate from an online translation course. The inscription read, "The day I knew you were ready, we were just waiting for the world to catch up." Valentina clutched the album to her chest, breaking down completely. Patricia wrapped her arms around her, followed by Carmen, until the whole room was a tangle of embrace. It was that rare, heavy mix of grief and love that defies language. The weeks that followed moved at breakneck speed. With Patricia and a global legal team at her back, Valentina laid every scrap of evidence before the International Court of Justice. It didn't just make waves, it caused a diplomatic earthquake. 3 entire international trafficking rings were dismantled overnight. 17 corrupt officials across 6 nations were put in cuffs, but the arrests weren't Valentina's masterpiece. The recordings were. She produced a documentary called Voices of the Silenced. She personally translated every single testimony, amplifying the stories of those the system had tried to mute. It wasn't just word for word. She captured the raw emotion, the cultural nuance, the stripped-down humanity of it all. It went global instantly. 100 million views in the first week. Governments had nowhere to hide. They had to respond. Policy shifted. Lives were pulled back from the brink. That's when Ambassador Klaus Zimmermann from the UN reached out directly. "Ms. Reyes, you've shown a light on injustices that the powers that be have ignored for decades. On behalf of the United Nations, I'm offering you a role as a special translator for human rights. Your mandate would be simple: give a voice to the people the world refuses to hear." Valentina took the job, but with a non-negotiable term: the creation of a program to scout and train young talent lacking formal credentials. True genius, she argued, shouldn't require a university stamp of approval to be seen. They agreed without hesitation. 6 months later, Valentina stood in the very same courtroom where she'd once been shamed. Only this time she wasn't the defendant. She was the keynote speaker on linguistic justice. Judge Harrison Mitchell was sitting in the crowd. He'd been forced into early retirement after the fallout from Valentina's trial triggered a probe into his history of letting bias cloud his judgment. When the applause died down, Mitchell walked up to her. "Miss Reyes." His tone was small, humble, a ghost of the arrogant man he used to be. "There are no words to fix how I treated you, but I need you to know that your case, it woke me up. I had to face prejudices I didn't even realize were there. I'm consulting on judicial reforms now, trying to stop other judges from making my mistakes." "Judge Mitchell?" Valentina said, steady and calm. "Forgiveness doesn't undo the damage, but it clears the path for something better. Your awareness matters more than your apology. It proves people can actually evolve." They shook hands. It was a moment of healing, not just for them, but a symbol of what the justice system could actually become. Carmen managed to piece her life back together with Harrington's backing. She's running rehabilitation programs for the wrongfully convicted now. "You gave me hope when I was running on empty," she told Valentina. "I just want to pass that on." Patricia Mendoza was named Public Defender of the Year, but the awards didn't matter. It was the letters from clients inspired by her fight for Valentina that she kept on her desk. As for Professor Villarreal, he quietly resigned after the university board confirmed multiple counts of plagiarism. His disgrace stands as a stark warning to the academic elite. Integrity isn't optional. David Chen, the engineer brave enough to speak up first, launched a foundation for unconventional minds. "Valentina taught me that honor outweighs a paycheck or a title," he told the press. And Sophia, the girl at the detention center who risked her livelihood to help Valentina? She's on a full scholarship for social work, paid for by the very program Valentina built. It had been exactly 365 days since the handcuffs clicked shut, but today Valentina stood on free soil, gazing at the iron gates of the burial ground where her grandmother rested. She had flown all the way from Geneva, bypassing the corporate high-rises to come here, to the quiet earth that held her history. Dropping to her knees in the dirt, she laid down a bouquet of wild lilies. "Grandma," she whispered, the wind catching her voice. "It's done. I finished the work. Those people you shielded? The world is finally listening to them, and the syndicates, the powerful men who thought they were untouchable. We tore their networks down, brick by brick. They tried to bury the truth, tried to keep us quiet in the margins, but they failed. A gentle gust rustled the canopy above, a whisper from the natural world. But it wasn't just about the mission, Grandma. I finally get it. I know why you drilled those languages into my head. It wasn't about vocabulary or grammar rules, it was about seeing people. Realizing that everyone, no matter where they're born or how they speak, carries a weight that deserves to be acknowledged. Valentina reached into her worn satchel and pulled out the photo album. It was the same tattered book she'd rescued from the safety deposit box. She flipped to the back cover where a single, fresh photograph was affixed. The image captured her standing tall before the United Nations headquarters, a sea of faces behind her, people from every dusty corner of the globe whose struggles she had translated into power. "Look at this," she murmured. "We built this. This is us. You didn't suffer for nothing. Your spirit is alive in every single person who finally has the courage to speak up because of the tools you gave me." Twilight began to settle over the graves, and for the first time in years, the knot in Valentina's chest loosened. Her grandmother hadn't just taught her verbs and nouns, she had planted resilience in the soil of her mind. And now, that resilience had blossomed into a reckoning, a demand for justice that would outlast them both. The following morning, Valentina stood at the head of a classroom for the inaugural session of her new initiative. 30 young faces looked back at her, brilliant minds from the rougher parts of town, lacking diplomas but overflowing with raw potential. "My grandmother used to tell me something important," Valentina began, leaning against the desk. "True talent doesn't need a piece of paper with a stamp on it to exist. It just needs a crack in the door, a chance to show what it can do. You're sitting in these chairs because you have something the world needs. I'm not here to lecture you. I'm here to help you unlock the weapon you already carry." A girl in the front row tentatively raised her hand. "Miss Reyes, how can we be sure we're actually good enough, without the degrees?" Valentina offered a knowing smile, the ghost of her own insecurity surfacing. "Let me ask you this. Why did you show up today? You're here because you pushed back when society told you no. That grit? That refusal to stay in your lane? That is worth more than any framed doctorate on a wall." Seasons changed, and the initiative took on a life of its own, spreading its roots into 20 different nations. Thousands of gifted outsiders found doors opening that had previously been bolted shut against them. They became the new generation of translators, cultural bridges, and human rights defenders. Yet, a single thread connected them all. The unshakable conviction that capability outweighs pedigree, and that the voices usually relegated to the background deserve the main stage. Eventually, the establishment had to take notice. At a gala in the United Nations, Valentina stood center stage to accept the International Human Rights Award. Weighing the heavy crystal trophy in her hands, her mind drifted not to the applause, but to the invisible pillars that held her up. Her grandmother, who had given up her own life so Valentina could have one. Carmen, who saw value in her when she was hitting rock bottom. Patricia, who went to war for her when the odds were impossible. And Chen, who found the bravery to speak the truth when it mattered most. When Valentina approached the microphone, she didn't list her resume. She told them about Lucia. Lucia Reyes never walked a graduation stage. She never held a title or received a plaque for her labor, Valentina said, her voice echoing in the hall. But she knew something this room is just figuring out. A human being's worth isn't found in a transcript. It's found in their spine, in their character. She paused, swallowing the lump forming in her throat. "This isn't for me, it's for her, and it's for every person out there who has been overlooked, underpaid, and told to stay quiet. Let this be proof that brilliance blooms in the humblest places. Sometimes the people who change the world are the ones nobody bothered to look at." The applause that erupted was deafening. A standing ovation that rolled on for 5 solid minutes. Across the globe, people watching through screens weren't just cheering for Valentina. They were cheering for every unsung Lucia in their own lives. For the grandmothers, the mothers, the invisible laborers who broke their backs planting seeds, never knowing if they'd live to see the harvest. Later that evening, back in the quiet of her Geneva apartment, Valentina gazed out at the city lights shimmering below. Her phone buzzed on the table. Unknown caller. She picked up. "Miss Reyes, my name is Maria. I'm 16 years old, calling from a village in Guatemala. I watched your speech. I speak 5 languages. I picked them up from the tourists passing through here. Everyone around here says it doesn't count because I didn't go to a real school, but seeing you gave me this feeling that maybe there's a place for someone like me. Can I still apply to your program?" Valentina's eyes welled up, a soft smile touching her lips. "You absolutely can, Maria. Tell me everything." As the girl began to speak, Valentina realized this was it. this connection, this chance. This was the true inheritance her grandmother had left behind. It wasn't about the accolades or the criminal empires crumbling to dust, but about the invisible people finally being seen, every hidden talent unearthed, every silenced voice finding its roar. The legacy continued, with hope spreading like wildfire, and somewhere in the ether Valentina knew Lucia was beaming with pride. Because when the dust settled, this wasn't a saga about linguistics, systemic injustice, or court verdicts. It was a story about love. The fierce devotion of a grandmother arming her girl to take on the world, a connection deeper than death, time, or social standing. And that love, translated into 11 tongues and fueled by 1,000 acts of defiance, had finally set the world ablaze.